Buenos dias, chambriopsua, assalamu alaikum. Happy belated Mother's Day. I took yesterday off our fairy tale. We will begin again with the story of Nur-ed-Din and Enis-el-Jelis from The 1001 Nights. A beautiful day here in Santa Ana. It doesn't get any better than this. When we last left Ali Nur-ed-Din, his father had just passed away. Ali Nur-ed-Din for a long time remained in a state of violent grief for the loss of his father. But as he was sitting one day in his father's house, a person knocked at the door, and he rose up and opened it, and lo, there was a man who was one of his father's intimate companions. And he kissed the hand of Nur-ed-Din, and said to him, O my master, he who hath left a son like thee hath not died. This is the destination of the Lord of the first and the last among mankind. That's a very common phrase to describe God, whether it's in Islam, where Muhammad will be described as the first and the last, or the Alpha and the Omega. That same phrase is used to describe Jesus, and is even used in the Bhagavad Gita in the Hindu faith to describe their God, first and the last, and everything in between. This is the destination of the Lord of the first and the last among mankind. O my master, cheer up thy heart and give over mourning. And upon this, Ali Nur-ed-Din arose and went to the guest chamber and removed thither all that he required. And his companions came together to him, and he took again his slave girl, Enis-el-Jelis. And here's where we get a little sex, drugs, and rock and roll again. 10 companions came together to him, and he took again his slave. 10 of the sons of the merchants became his associates, and he gave entertainment after entertainment, and began to be lavish with presents. His steward therefore came to him and said to him, O my master Nur-ed-Din, hast thou not heard the saying, he who expendeth and doth not calculate is reduced to poverty? This profuse expenditure and these magnificent presents will annihilate the property. But when Ali Nur-ed-Din heard these words of his steward, he looked at him and replied, Of all that thou hast said to me, I will not attend to one word. How excellent is the saying of the poet, If I be possessed of wealth and be not liberal, may my hand never be extended, nor my foot raised. Show me the avaricious, who hath attained glory by his avarice, and the munificent, who hath died through his munificence. So they continued to party. Know, O steward, he continued, that if there remain in thy hands what will suffice for my dinner, thou shalt not burden me with anxiety respecting my supper. So the steward left him, and went his way, and Ali Nur-ed-Din resumed his habits of extravagant generosity. Rock on. Whenever any one of his companions said, Verily this thing is beautiful, he would reply, It is a present to thee. And if any said, Oh my master, verily such a house is delightful, he would reply, It is a present to thee. He ceased not to give entertainments to his companions from the commencement of day, one after another, until he had passed in this manner a whole year. After which, as he was sitting with them, he heard the slave girl recite these 2 verses, or poetry. Thou thoughtest well of the days when they went well with thee, and fearedst not the evil that destiny was bringing. Thy nights were peaceful, and thou wast deceived by them. In the midst of their brightness, there cometh gloom. What a buzzkill, huh? And immediately after, a person knocked at the door, So Nur-ed-Din rose, and one of his companions followed him without his knowledge. And when he opened the door, he beheld his steward and said to him, "What is the news?" "O my master," answered the steward, "that which I feared on thy account hath happened to thee." "How is that?" asked Nur-ed-Din. The steward answered, "Know that there remaineth not of thy property in my hands anything equivalent to a piece of silver, or less than a piece of silver, or less than 2 pesos. When Ali Nur-ed-Din heard these words, he hung down his head towards the ground and exclaimed, "There is no strength nor power but in God." And the man who had followed him secretly to pry into his case, as soon as he heard what the steward told him, returned to his companions and said to them, "See what you will do, for Nur-ed-Din hath become bankrupt." So when Nur-ed-Din returned to them, grief appeared to them in his countenance, and immediately one of them rose and looked towards him, said to him, "O my master, I desire that thou wouldst permit me to depart." "Why thus depart today?" said Nur-ed-Din. His guest answered, "My wife is to give birth to a child this night, and it is impossible for me to be absent from her. I desire, therefore, to go and see her." And he gave him leave. Then another rose and said to him, "O my master Nur-ed-Din, I desire today to visit my brother, for he celebrated the circumcision of his son." Thus each of them asked leave of him deceitfully, and went his way until all had departed. So even 1,000 years ago, those people who are your friends when times are good will often leave you quickly when times go bad. So Ali Nur-ed-Din remained alone, and he called his slave girl and said to her, "O Enis-el-Jelis, seest thou not what hath befallen me?" And he related to her what the steward had told him. She replied, "O my master, for some nights past I have been anxious to speak to thee of this affair, but I heard thee reciting these 2 verses. When fortune is liberal to thee, be thou liberal to all others before she escape from thee. For liberality will not annihilate thy wealth when she is favorable, nor avarice preserve it when she deserteth thee." And when I heard thee repeat these words, I was silent and would not make any remark to thee. So we see there are always verses in Proverbs and sayings that will prove whatever you want to prove. Never trust anyone over 30. And when I heard thee repeat these words, I was silent and would not make any remark to thee. "O Enis-el-Jelis," he rejoiced, "thou knowest that I have not expended my wealth but on my companions, and I do not think that they will abandon me without relief." "By Allah," said she, "they will be of no use to thee." You women know this stuff. But he said, "I will immediately arise and go to them and knock at their doors. Perhaps I shall obtain from them something which I will employ as capital wherewith to trade, and I will cease from diversion and sport." So he arose instantly and proceeded without stopping until he arrived at the by-street in which his 10 companions resided, for they all lived in that same street. And he advanced to the first door and knocked, and there came forth to him a slave girl, who said to him, "Who art thou?" He answered, "Say to thy master, Ali Nur-ed-Din is standing at the door, and saith to thee, thy slave kisseth thy hands, looking for a favor from thee." And the girl entered and acquainted her master, but he called out to her, saying, "Return, and tell him he is not here. Nobody's home." The girl therefore returned to Nur-ed-Din and said to him, "My master, sir, is not here." And he went on, saying within himself, "If this is a knave, and hath denied himself, another is not." He then advanced to the next door, and said as he had said before, and the second also denied himself. And Nur-ed-Din exclaimed, They are gone, who, if thou stoodest at their door, would bestow upon thee the bounty thou desirest. By Allah, he added, I must try all of them. Perchance one of them may stand me in the place of all the others. And he went round to all 10, but found not that one of them would open the door, or show himself, or even order him a cake or bread. And he recited the following verses. A man in prosperity resembleth a tree, around which people flock, as long as it hath fruit. But as soon as it hath dropped all that it bore, they disperse from beneath it, and seek another. Perdition to all the people of this age, for I find not one man of integrity among 10. And let that be a lesson to you. Your true friends are the ones that are there in times of sadness, and in times of happiness, in times of prosperity, and in times of scarcity. We'll stop here today. What will happen to Nur-ed-Din, abandoned by his friends? We'll find out tomorrow. Vaya con Dios.